Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's session of Turn on Federalism. My name is Soren Kyle, and I work at Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK. I am one of two executive directors for the website 50 Shades of Federalism. Today's session will focus on COVID-19 and the federalization process in the Philippines. Our Turn on Federalism seminars are a joint venture of the Hans Seidel Foundation, which is a German political foundation with a mandate from the German Federal Parliament, whose core tasks include to promote and support democracy and the rule of law within Germany, especially through civic education in Bavaria, but also through worldwide activities in more than 60 partner countries. The second partner is 50 Shades of Federalism. This is a website project established in 2017 at Canterbury Christ Church University, which publishes short papers on different discussions on federalism. Our online series, Turn on Federalism, aims to discuss the 50 Shades of Federalism papers, to engage in a wider discourse with experts, politicians, civil society activists around the world, in order to look at the possibilities of federalism, its different shades, and also its country-based evolutions. The idea is to create networks of cooperation and exchange. Our topic today will focus on the Philippines. Federalism has had some history in the political discourse in the Philippines. Yet in recent years, especially with the election of President Duterte, it has been revived as an idea. So our speaker today will look at how has this federalism debate in the country been affected by the COVID-19 virus and the measures taken by the Philippine government. And from that, we will look at what does the future hold for the federalization in the Philippines? And what does the current situation tell us about the prospect of federalism in the Philippines? Please allow me to introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Raymond Rosuelo. He is the chief of the research and Knowledge Management Division of the Commission of Human Rights of the Philippines. And he's also a PhD candidate from the De La Salle University in the Philippines. Those of you who join us more regularly will know our moderator. The event today is moderated by Ms. Anja Richter, who is the resident representative of the Hans Seidel Foundation in the United Kingdom in London. Without further delay, please allow me to hand over to today's speaker. Raymond, you have the word.
Good day, everyone. Let me just share my screen so that we can begin my presentation. Okay. I hope you can see it clearly now.
Don't think we can see the presentation, Raymond. Try again sharing.
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
you check if you can see it now?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay. Yes, as Soren has said, I come from the Philippines, and I've taken quite an interest in the study of Federalist movement in the country. So for today's presentation, I'm be focusing on a number of points. Among these, as listed here, are answering some questions about why is there limited support for federalism amongst elites and the public in the Philippines. Second point that I would be emphasizing in this presentation would be how has COVID-19 highlighted the centralized and unitary character of the country. And lastly, I will focus on what options exist for wider state reform for the future. Very quickly, for some of you who are not yet familiar with the case of the Philippines, it's a unitary government headed, as Soren had mentioned, President Rodrigo Duterte. It's a presidential republic type of government. However, it has a number of decentralized features. It has, for example, a number of local governments, such as we have 81 provinces, 146 cities, 1,488 municipalities, and we also have sub-municipal levels of governance known as barangays or villages. And the way our constitution has been designed gives substantial local autonomy to these local governments. So much so that some observers have noted that the Philippines could be characterized as a quasi-federal state. For example, Tigno, a Filipino political scientist, pointed out that the 1987 Constitution, the framers of the 1987 Constitution, the fundamental law which the current government is based on, thought about well, there was a strong debate within that constitutional commission, and then there was a proposal to create a federal structure. However, there were worries about the possible effects of federalism leading to the republic's disintegration, owing to the fact that at that time there were strong secessionist movements that existed in the country. There was, especially in the southern part of the country, in the island of Mindanao. So the negotiated settlement was to the compromise essentially was to provide substantial autonomy to the local levels that I've mentioned. It was recently during the time of the election of President Duterte, wherein at the national level, there was a strong emphasis to federalize the country. I say this because in previous iterations, the debate was simply to move towards parliamentary type of government from the present presidential system. But under President Duterte, there was a strong push to federalize. Some observers claim that this will provide a framework wherein the potential for regional growth should be maximized. And it will also solve the secessionist rebellion in the South, particularly in Mindanao, wherein you have long-running secessionist claims being provided for by the, or being fought by the rebels in the South, Muslim rebels in the South. So to somehow address these contentious claims and to promote basically the interests of the regions that were left behind in the development process in the Philippines, there was a proposed constitution known as the Bayanihan Constitution. And very quickly, these are some of the features that differentiates the current constitution from the proposed constitution. As you can see, there are um, 16, currently now there are 16 regions in the country. But in the proposed constitution, there will be 18 regions that will be eventually be considered as states. And then at the moment, we have senators that are elected nationally. There are 24 of them. But in the proposed constitution, there will be 2 senators per region, similar to what we see now in the United States, which is one of the models of federalism that is being seen as a possible pattern for the federalism that will be implemented in the country. For the House of Representatives, currently we have 304 members, although this was over the years, additional representations were added as the population of the Philippines had grown. For the next constitution that is being envisioned, it will be that number will increase to 400, composed of 240 district representatives and 160 proportional for proportional party representation. This is another key difference. We have right now the president and the vice president in the country can be elected separately, meaning they could come from 2 different parties. But for the proposed constitution, we're going to emulate the system that's like in the United States, where a vote for the president will also be the same as the vote for the vice president. So the thinking is that this will eliminate a situation wherein you have the 2 highest officials in the land bickering with one another in terms of policy. One of the biggest changes, of course, will be in the Supreme Court, the Judicial Department. Right now, we only have 1 Supreme Court, but in the proposed constitution, there will be 4 major courts that will be formed: the Federal Supreme Court, the Federal Constitutional Court, the Federal Administrative Court, and the Federal Electoral Court. What the members of the Constitutional Commission foresees that all the other issues that will not be taken up by the 3 courts, the Federal Constitutional Court, the Federal Administrative Court, and the Federal Electoral Court, will be taken up by the Federal Supreme Court. And perhaps one of the biggest changes, of course, is the elevation of administrative regions into political regions. Now they will have decision-making and powers that they do not have now, since most of what happens now, particularly in the Regional Development Council, which is an intergovernmental mechanism, is more of a coordinated function rather than actual political decision-making. So to go to some of the key points that I would like to discuss after providing that rather brief background about the Philippines. Where are we in terms of federalism, the federalism initiative in the country? Unfortunately for its advocates, there is limited support for the federalism initiative. As you can see here, one of the main reasons why there is limited support for it is the lack of knowledge of Filipinos regarding the Federalist initiative. 75% of the country's voting population does not know the federalism debate or the tenets of the federalism debate. And probably because of that, 67% in another major survey that was conducted, when asked if they support federalism, they are against. So that's like 2/3 of the voting population is against it. Now, I've tried in my paper to also look at a number of cultural factors for trying to dig deeper into the federalism debate. And I noticed that while President Duterte, and I had argued this, that while he had championed in the past the cause of federalism, the situation with COVID-19 now has simply highlighted some political some aspects of Philippine political culture that militate against federalism. And I think I have to thank Professor Remigio Palo, who came up with a model of the Philippine political system. For those of you who are familiar with concepts like um, the separation of powers among the three branches of government, the Philippines is a bit unique in that sense that while we have, for example, like in the United States, we have the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. There, there are peculiarities within the Philippines, and some of this is institutionalized in our laws that makes the executive department more powerful vis-a-vis these other departments of government. And Agpalo noted this, he called this a Pangulo regime, wherein the president occupies, seems as like the head. Literally, it's the head of the government, the one that controls basically all the other aspects of the Philippine political structure. Now, I would say that Duterte is basically the embodiment of the Pangulo regime. In fact, during his campaign, he had underscored, because the tenets of the Pangulo regime emphasizes the value of fraternity, or in our language, it's called pagdamay, or caring. And during the campaign of President Duterte, when he was championing the cause of, along with the cause of federalism, he was also part of his motto was were two things, tapang and malasakit, being courageous and being caring. And for many Filipinos, that is probably the ideal type of leader that they want. Somebody who will be able to be tough on certain issues, but at the same time, balance it, at least maybe as they perceive it, as somebody that cares, and essentially cultivating an image of being the father of the nation. So there's a certain dependency that is created on that, but that is the way things have played out. So as some of us would know, sometimes the father makes the most important decisions, most of the decisions in the house. So what has happened during this, because of this type of political culture that we have, and how has that impacted the response to COVID-19? So I would argue that, it has highlighted the centralized and the unitary character of the government. And primarily, we could see examples of that taking place due to what I would call the increasing challenges to the principle of subsidiarity, wherein we see central government pronouncement leading to certain local government decisions being undermined. So decisions that I think local government should be in a better position to do, being the ones to be close to the action, so to speak. And all of this, I think, sends mixed signals to those who, to a lot of people, regarding the value of federalism. If the goal of federalism is to empower lower levels of government, or to have some form of shared sovereignty, some of these actions that I will try to list down later on is indicative of, as I said, it sends mixed signals. Maybe it's something that it runs contrary to the rhetoric that is being shared by the administration. So what are some of these observations that I've made regarding some of these challenges to the principle of subsidiarity? One case involved, for example, the case of Pasig City. It's one of the richest local government units in the country. Recently, it elected a very young, dynamic mayor who, I think in my assessment, a lot of people are watching, because this person has I think a lot of people are really thinking that he has the potential to eventually go up to higher office sometime later on once certain constitutional requirements are satisfied. He's quite known for doing innovative approaches, particularly in addressing COVID-19 for his local government unit. However, some proposals that he had caught the ire of the central government. I think which somehow led high officials of the Duterte administration, in some extent, there was an investigation done by the national, by what is the equivalent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the country against him for some of his acts. And this is not an isolated case. We've seen this in other instances in the country wherein those local government units who were trying to implement particular innovations or actions to solve or to deal with the COVID-19 crisis within their respective jurisdiction were also subjected to, their decisions were overridden by the national government. This was also the case particularly in Cebu. Transportation policies for local governments, usually this is in the realm of local governments, but then probably it's not normal to see that you will have a national government official, no less than the president, trying to override a purely local government matter in terms of local transportation. But in a public address, he actually did that. Another thing that I would like to highlight is the lack of coordination, particularly for the national government, to somehow address the problem of COVID-19. One controversial program, which I think may have contributed to the spread of COVID-19 in the country, was the Balik Probinsya program. This was initiated by a close ally of the president. Normally, I would think that this is a very good policy. We'll have in normal times, you'll have people, decongest the urban centers in the country, and so the aid the people to go back to the provinces and maybe start to have better living conditions there. But these were there was a rapid deployment of this particular program without proper consultations with the members of the local government units. And I'm not alone in this particular sentiment that this may somehow have contributed to the spread of COVID-19. Local government, national government policy being imposed on local government units. As a support for that particular claim, the mayor of a southern province or city by the name of Richard Gomez had criticized this lack of coordination by the central government. And like Bico Soto, as I mentioned in my example earlier, he was also subjected to serious criticism from high-ranking officials of the Duterte administration for his pronouncement, wherein he had voiced this concern for the lack of proper coordination resulting to the spread of COVID-19 in his province. So where are we now? What are these examples show that there's an ongoing tension between local governments, and there's a strong preponderance of power for the national government that undermines local government decision making. So one point that I would like to look at also is what options exist for wider state reform, since the debate on federalism, I think, will still continue despite of some of these setbacks towards local empowerment that I have observed. I think there are a couple of trends that we have to watch out. One is by next year, there will be a serious change in terms of the distribution of financial resources to local government units. There was a Supreme Court decision that paves the way for the granting of larger sums of money to the local government units. And this will necessitate a reduction in the number of state workers at the national level, and some of the functions that used to be done by the national government will eventually have to be transferred to local government units. The reason for this is that the share of taxes from the funds usually came only from collections by our internal revenue service would also be, it will not be only limited to that particular collecting agency. The funds will not be only coming from that. All forms of taxes now will also be will become the basis for the computation of funds to be directed to local government units. We call this allocation an internal revenue allotment. So there will be a huge influx of funds that will be coming to local government units. The hope is that they would be able to properly use it to address some of the local government concerns and bring governance, the effects of good governance closer to the people. Another trend I think that is worth watching is, of course, the upcoming elections next year. The Philippines has a 6-year electoral cycle for the position of president. It's the most important political position in the country, and the leading potential candidate, because they're only going to be able to file their certificates of candidacy in October, but based on the early surveys, the pre-election surveys that are being conducted, the daughter of President Duterte, Sara, is in the lead, and there's a substantial gap between her and the next potential candidate that would contest for the 2022 elections. Now, in this particular slide, I told that I placed there the term Dugo. Dugo is it takes from the initials of the two surnames, Duterte and Go. Admittedly, I'm not exactly a fan of them using this particular combination, primarily because in the Philippine language, Dugo means bloody or blood, and given the growing concern about extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, I don't know if this is the right pairing that should be put in place by the administration. Be that as it may, Sarah, the daughter of the president, had in an interview said that she is not that enthusiastic with pursuing the Federalist agenda. On the other hand, Go, who is like a foster son, who is currently also a senator in the country, but still functions as a close in aid of the president, is a champion of the Federalist initiative, having always echoed the sentiments of his mentor, President Rodrigo Duterte. So it would be interesting that after 2022, there might be renewed interest to again pursue the Federalist project in the Philippines. Right now, it's probably not a good time until new elections are held. Usually, based on previous studies of major legislations in the country, the most significant legislations are usually done during the first 2 to 3 years of the president's term. But and after that, it becomes exceedingly difficult to have an election for president. The pursuance of an agenda of an elected president, because most of the people are concerned that his popularity is already low, or it might be that they are already gearing towards the preparation for a new set of elections to come by. So these are trends I think I see. And I guess just to conclude, I would like to emphasize again that political culture plays a critical role in the federalism initiative in the country. The COVID-19 situation has shown that, while previously there were strong calls for autonomy and federalism, the policy responses on the ground indicate that it might not be that supportive of such an initiative. And lastly, in the near term, I think we will see the Philippines, basically see facets of federalism being implemented more strongly because of the recent jurisprudence from the Supreme Court. And also that the long-term prospects of federalism may hinge on the continuation of the Duterte political dynasty. Thank you for your kind attention, and I will be gladly answering your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Raymond, for your presentation and sharing your insights. This was a great introduction to federalism in the Philippines, and welcome to our global audience, of course, also on behalf of the Hans Zeidler Foundation. It's great to have you with us, and a special welcome to so many of you tuning in from the Philippines today. That's great to see you. For those of you who are new to the seminar series, and I assume many of you will be, this is now the part of the event where you are able to ask Raymond questions on his presentation on federalism in the Philippines, but also for those of you tuning in from around the world to ask questions or raise issues that relate more to your respective countries. I would just start and kick us off with a few questions while you're still thinking what to ask. Please don't raise your hand. There's too many of you for me to count hands or call you to ask questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, keep them short and snappy, and please refrain from just commenting so we can get through as many questions as we can and get them answered for you. So, Raymond, you've outlined how President Duterte has championed federalism during his election campaign, and also how in the beginning his administration seemed to push that agenda. But, he's been known as a strongman before. So for an outsider, his initial push for federalism might also seem a bit surprising. So why do you think he championed it, at least initially, and then somewhat abandoned it? Did he think it was a winning policy or agenda? Because this would suggest that it's generally very popular with voters and citizens, but you've also outlined that there's a lack of public support, mostly due to lack of knowledge. So how does this all fit together then?
Well, thank you for that question, Anja. Admittedly, as an outsider, there will really be some questions. Why is it that somebody who has strongman tendencies would be for a federalist agenda that is designed to reduce the power of the central government? But you have to look at the internal dynamics of Philippine society and look also at the history of the Philippines, particularly those in the South, from whom the strong push for federalism comes from. By the way, President Duterte is the first president who hails from Mindanao. There are three major island groups in the Philippines: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And for the most part in the history of the country, most presidents had either come from Luzon or the Visayas. It's only President Duterte who had finally been able to win from Mindanao, because perhaps there was a strong bias against people from Mindanao in the past. But having come from a place where there was some strong secessionist tendencies, so he is aware of these issues. So he had pushed. In fact, if you look at this, the levels of support for federalism, you would find that it is strong in Mindanao, from where Duterte had come from, and which is the base of his strong popularity. So it resonated with a lot of people from Mindanao, and I think it still does, no, until this point. But it's in the other areas of the republic, which it does not hold much of an attraction. So I think COVID-19 has greatly impacted the decision. In fact, to somehow not push for the federalism initiative at this stage. For one, there was the need to have a strong government response, given the scale of the problem that the country has and continues to face at the moment. So, to recap my answer to that question, during the campaign, it resonated well with, especially from the southern base, and that somehow that contributed to his victory, and even after 2016, he has enjoyed so much high levels, unprecedented levels of popularity that somehow, while the proposal might be not that popular in the other regions of the country, he has pushed for it without him being skated by, this not being aligned with the thinking of those people in the northern and middle parts of the country.
Yeah, so it had more to do with Duterte's specific background or origins than. But while we are talking about Mindanao, I'd like to push you a little further on this, because in many countries, the introduction of federalist structures is part of a process to diffuse ethnic or religious tensions as well. And you've mentioned the secessionist movement or rebellion, as you called it, in Mindanao. To what extent do you then see the current process of decentralization and the new autonomy regime in dominantly Muslim Mindanao as part of a wider federalization process? And in how far do you think it actually addresses or diffuses those tensions in the Philippines?
Well, we're essentially experimenting with federalism without it being officially labeled as federalism. I'm referring to Dambang-Samoro Autonomous Region in Mindanao. We actually have, even prior to that, there was already what is known as the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. What happened essentially was the number of geographical territories that were previously under the ARMM were expanded, and that this somehow provided a venue, a structure within the secessionist movement could be brought into mainstream politics and lay down their arms in the process. The current head of this, of the BARM region, was the head of the largest Muslim secessionist group in the country. So I guess in that way we have some form of peace dividend. We're in the largest, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which waged war against the country in the early 2000s under the presidency of President Joseph Estrada, had basically laid out their arms. Although there are still a number of splintered groups from these large secessionist groups that have somehow waged pitched battles against our armed forces. But generally, I think it provided a structure, something that will give a reason for the members of the secessionist groups to finally lay down their arms and pursue genuine peace in the country.
So not really part of a wider federalization process then. But while we're speaking about the origins being a maybe decisive factor to become president in one case or the other, do you see local government potentially as a springboard for a career in federal politics? Because you've hinted that Vico, as he's called from Pasig City, might be a future hopeful. So could this be an example where somebody has proven himself on the local government level and then using that as a springboard to become president, which is, for example, often the case in Germany, where politicians have executive experience on the Länder level and then run for chancellor. And that is usually seen as a plus or as a strength. Do you see a similar development, potential development in the Philippines?
Well, President Duterte was the mayor of
Exactly.
before. He did not. Traditionally, those who become presidents were either from the Senate, because those were the traditional stepping board to becoming president of the republic. But Duterte, if you look at the enumeration of local government units in the country, a city is, belongs to a lower tier of governance in terms of ranking, but in terms of maybe political power and status, compared to, let's say, for example, a senator or a sitting vice president. But Duterte made that jump. And if you look at the candidate that I mentioned, who is still thinking about becoming, who is being pushed by certain sectors to become president, Duterte's daughter is also the current mayor of Davao City. In the recent polls in the country, the one who is tailing Sara in terms of becoming a president is the mayor of the capital of the country, Francisco Dumagoso. So we have here, I guess, because of President Duterte's background as a former local government executive, it has ushered in more attention to those with local government experience to be seen as viable candidates to become head of the government of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. I think more related to the previous question on Mindanao as well, we've got a question from the audience on asymmetrical federalism. As one of the options of accommodating identity and regional claims. How far has this option been explored in the Philippines?
Right now, we have, as I said, we have BARM, and we also have other primarily ethnic, based on along ethnic lines. In the north, we also have the Cordillera administrative region. The only in our present constitution, it provides for two autonomous regions to be set up, one in the north and one in the south. But it did not garner support in the same level that was seen in the south, so that only one was set up. Be that as it may, those they had been provided for, and we, for example, in the case of the BARM, more fiscal transfers were being provided to this region, so that at a new set of officials, like a chief minister position was created, which was not part of the usual structures that we would see within the other local government units in the country.
And you've just mentioned something very important we've also discussed in previous seminars: fiscal equalization, fiscal transfers. And you've mentioned how this will change next year, or is at least supposed to change in the Philippines next year. Of course, at the end of the day, it's always about the money, who gets what. And the questions or tensions around fiscal equalization exist in every federation, whether in name or in theory. Could you explain a bit more how the just share, as you called it, of taxes between the federal and local governments work in the Philippines, and the internal revenue allotments? how much is being transferred, who gets to decide, and how, in your view, do you think it should work?
Well, we have a 60-40 formula, and 60% of the revenues from our revenue generating agencies goes to the national government, and 40% should go to the local governments. There's a certain formula wherein you divide it based on land area, population size, and the classification of what type of local government you are, whether you're a province, you are a municipality, you are a city. Provinces and cities have the same formula, while around 33%, while municipal levels get 20% out of that 40% that is allocated for the sub-municipal, that goes to the sub-municipal levels. So what is expected next year is that since it will not be only limited to funds that are collected by our Internal Revenue Service or our Bureau of Internal Revenue, more of essentially the pie will become bigger. So more, while the same computation might be pursued, you now have a bigger share that will be forthcoming. So this will provide more resources, and also not only resources but also capability challenges. Like one thing that is notable in Philippine politics, rather in the Philippine administrative setup, is the problem of absorptive capacity, wherein you have huge amounts of funds being downloaded to certain government agencies, but the capacity of those agencies to actually spend those funds are sometimes not that good. So you have a number of unutilized funds, and this is something that should be also be focused upon by the national government, and how they should capacitate local governments to be able to properly utilize this huge influx of funds coming their way.
Just for audience, as a quick reminder, we've got another 10 to 15 minutes. So put your questions in the Q&A box, whatever you want to ask Raymond. In the meantime, Raymond, you mentioned that there was a lack of coordination, in your view, of the central government's response to the COVID-19 crisis. In our previous seminar on intergovernmental relations, we discussed the importance of coordination mechanisms of fora between the different levels of government, especially in times of crisis. And we heard the Bavarian State Minister Florian Herrmann telling us from a Bavarian perspective how in Germany the minister-presidents summits had been crucial for decision-making during the crisis. Are there actually any formal or informal coordination mechanisms in the Philippines between the federal and local governments? And if not, do you see that as one of maybe the reasons why there was such a lack of coordination?
Well, we have what are known as the regional development councils. These are, the local government units are part of that, and also there are representatives from the national government agencies, the different line agencies. They meet and discuss what are where they're supposed to meet and discuss what are the plans that are going to be implemented in the regions. But these are, I think the scale of the problem somehow prevented proper coordination within these particular mechanisms. This should somehow, I think this should be strengthened so that more of these inputs, especially from the local government units, could be properly taken into consideration in decision making from at the topmost level.
The Philippines has had the longest and harshest lockdowns in the world, which has also led to food shortages. What do you think the long-term impacts will be, and not least regarding questions on decentralization?
Right now we have the presence of community pantries emerging all over the place. I guess it's a coping mechanism of the population, given that unlike more developed countries who are able to provide substantial aid to their citizens, we do not have the same type of resources, and given that also our population on a per capita basis is probably larger than the other more developed states. So it's something that's worth watching, because that might have an impact on the elections next year. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I see that as an important trend that might impact the Federalist initiative, because the leading candidate now and is a scion of the president, and her potential vice president is a strong supporter of the Federalist initiative. So if somehow these ongoing crises will be prolonged, to the point that it might erode their political capital, so by extension, that might also affect prospects for federalism in the country.
We've got another question on Mindanao. I think that's what most people in the world have also heard about previously, not least because that's where President Duterte is from. What are, in your opinion, commonalities and differences of Mindanao in comparison to regions with separatist ambitions or de facto states in Europe or other places, but particularly in Europe, such as Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or Transnistria? Is there anything we can sort of compare or replicate?
Well, one of the things that because I met some of these members of these former rebels, and then had somehow seen that maybe peace is the way to go. I remember distinctly during one of these webinars, they said, we are probably at a pace wherein those who are in the position right now, meaning the more senior leaders of these secessionist groups, are at a stage wherein they want to have some to see that peace is realized within their time. So they said that if that would not be possible within us, that would frustrate the younger generation, Muslims, especially in the South, and that will provide the basis for the prolonging of conflict, secessionist tendencies in the South. So I guess the age of the the senior leaders is an important factor. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the case of that. If that is how comparable that is for the case of, let's say, for example, secessionist movements in Europe. But that was seen, I think, as an important consideration, that generation of leaders at the helm, who eventually became the leaders now of BARM, decided that maybe it's time, because we want to see peace happen while we're still here. Because if this opportunity for us to have a political arrangement that will cater to our aspirations for greater autonomy would pass by, then that would be that would be a great missed opportunity, and that would probably result in more conflict in the future.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of lesson learned, going the other way around, who do you think the Philippines look to? What's countries in the world or federalizing countries do Filipinos look to and have shared their experiences or learned lessons from others? Is it the US or is it Malaysia, more in the neighborhood, or are there any particular countries?
Well, there's a strong bias towards looking at the American model, primarily because the Philippines used to be a colony of the United States, and we have very strong affinity to the US government. In the United States as a country, have 2 million Filipinos living overseas who are in the United States. So I guess it's but natural to look at the US as the primary model. As I mentioned in one of my slides, even the structuring of the potential legislative department is a mirror, essentially is very similar to the structure of the United States, because right now we have 24 senators being elected on a national basis. That's why some of them believe that each and every one of them could be potentially be the president. But in a future setup, if that is eventually approved, we will be limiting the jurisdiction of these senators to their particular regions, similar to, let's say, for example, in the US, that senators are only from California or from Arizona. So this time around, if that would happen in the Philippines, it would be senators will be coming from one of the ethnic regions in the country.
We've spoken a lot about federalism during the administration of President Duterte, but how strong was federalism before he took office? You noted in your paper that the writers of the Constitution feared that calling for federalization would lead to the republic's disintegration. That's why they kept the unitary system, at least by name. Would that fear still be valid today if there's a new draft of the Constitution and maybe a discussion about a name change? Do you think that fear is still valid? And then more generally, how do we make sure that federalist structures are permanent or irreversible, independent of a particular president or administration?
Well, right now, a lot of people really don't understand what federalism is, because there are, of course, a number of models that can be looked at, and maybe future polls on it would look at having more specific questions related to these forms to be asked to our citizens, so that we can properly gauge. But at the moment, there's not much strong support from the members of the population, and I guess there's this inherent fear, because the problem is that the federalist debate in the country has been mixed with a lot of other issues. For example, since any move towards having a federalist system would require a change in the Constitution, a lot of people have linked it with the issue of there might be some strong tendencies to engage in some self-serving, to enact some self-serving policies on the part of our politicians, like, for example, removing term limits. And that some adds to the fear of the people, that there are provisions in the present Constitution which people think are necessary to maintain democracy might be tinkered by certain groups in the guise of, in the process of pursuing a federalist agenda. So personally, I think that's something that is, preventing a, having even a proper discourse on the topic. Since it becomes rather confused with a whole other issues.
Yeah, so knowledge is key, you would argue. But as my last question, and regular viewers of our seminars will already know what comes next, I ask every expert how people will become true federalists, looking at safeguarding mechanisms, specific constitutions. You've also spoken a lot about political culture and ethnic factors. Again, knowledge is key in your view, but what else could be done in order to make Filipinos true federalists?
Well, they have to understand. Well, part of that is, of course, the educational system should provide for greater discussions on this. And I think for the administration, and this is something that I was really appalled because during the time wherein they were trying to popularize the concept of federalism, they were getting people who did not know what federalism is. I mean, as absurd as it may sound, they even got an adult video actress to spread the word about federalism. I mean, how can that, add to the credibility of this system wherein you're requiring massive changes? You have to get, I would often use the term norm entrepreneurs, people who can propagate this idea, that have the credibility to champion the cause of federalism. We used to have that. Unfortunately, he had passed away, but there are other people who within the country who might be able to take the cudgels. Also, the Duterte administration has, and if it will still be continued by her daughter, they have to really take a strong, a well-defined stance on this thing. What happened was last time, they were sending a signal that federalism is something that they would push, but then there were actions. Aside from the Solicitor General was questioning the distribution of funds that I mentioned before the Supreme Court, and if you're going to champion, are you going to champion it wholeheartedly, or because that that confuses a lot of people. That I think that has to be clarified at the highest level. If federalism is to move in this, the federalism initiative in the country is to move.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can see there's still lots of work to do. I could cheekily argue they should come to more of our seminars to learn about federalism. But I'm going to close the discussion at this point. There will be another seminar, so you can learn more about federalism. In June, at the same time, we will speak to Elena Kremyanskaya about the Russian Federation, a country where the clue is actually in the name. So thank you all for watching and participating in today's session. And of course, a special thank you to Raymond for sharing your insights on federalism and beyond in the Philippines, and for answering all these questions on other aspects as well. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for this opportunity as well.
Have a good evening, or even good night soon. And to everyone else, have a good day, and I'll see you next time in June. Bye-bye.